it is the Saturday Coffee Klatch with Heather Lofthouse and yours truly, Robert Reich. And Heather, we've got a lot this week to talk about.
So much. The Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court.
Donald Trump.
Well, actually,
wave.
there is an overlap between the Supreme Court and Donald
Sadly,
Trump.
big time.
Because they have not decided the most important case on the docket.
Trump versus United States.
I love that title. It does encapsulate a lot.
It's our era.
What people don't realize is that by not deciding that case, the Supreme Court has decided the case. Essentially, the court has decided that presidential immunity is enough to push this case until after the election. And that's what's going to happen.
Right.
Even if they decide differently, the practical effect is that Trump wins. And if he wins the election, obviously, the whole case is destroyed. But the justice delayed is justice denied.
Right.
And this is what the justices are doing.
It feels like it's been ages since it all started, right?
Yes. Jack Smith referred the case to the court system before Christmas 2023, last year. And a lot of people thought, there is time. And the district court dismissed. It's a stupid question. Can a president be immune, criminally immune for everything that he does, including, a coup d'etat?
I know.
And the district court basically said, this is crazy. And the Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia said this is crazy. And then it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has basically had oral argument in April, and then it sat on it.
Right. So this is actionless action.
Actionless action. This is what was that Sherlock Holmes case, the dog that didn't bark? Mm-hmm. This is the dog that doesn't bark.
Right.
And so...
and I'm your Watson over here.
You are John Watson. Thank you. You're great. There is a question of responsibility. This Supreme Court, is the most irresponsible Supreme Court in living memory, certainly living memory.
And let's be clear, they can move quickly when they want to, including on President Trump, right?
Well, look at the Colorado case.
Yep.
The question of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, was Trump entitled to be on the ballot or not? And they moved very, very fast.
Yeah, they did. So it's so interesting to watch them do nothing. So your point is...
It's interesting to watch them do nothing.
Yeah.
But they don't make headlines for doing nothing. That's the point.
I know.
And they are already held in such low repute by the public.
That's it.
That you would think, what they're doing now, they're not only slow-walking Trump versus the United States, but they are slow-walking all the controversial cases. They're putting them right to the end of the term. They're going to come out with a bunch of them. So the media is going to fall over itself trying to sort it all out for the public. And I think this is a way of just avoiding the fact that they're going to be making some decisions that are very anti-democratic,
right.
Small d.
Right. And so you mentioned, they're in ill repute, but it's trust, right? It really is. People do not trust institutions, and this is not helping.
No. In fact, the Supreme Court, as the founders of the Constitution said, is the least dangerous branch, at least theoretically, because it doesn't have the purse, it doesn't have any money to spend, it doesn't have the sword, as the founder said, it doesn't have the military behind it, it doesn't have any way of enforcing its decisions. It only has public trust. And if there were to be a president, I can't imagine who it would be, but if there were ever to be a president who said, I'm just not going to follow the Supreme Court.
Right.
What's the court going to do? Public opinion is so important in terms of the court's legitimacy.
Right.
That the absence, right now it's around 35 to 40% of the public trusts this Supreme Court.
Right.
And John Roberts, the Chief Justice, I think it falls on him.
You've said, so first of all, you have argued before Supreme Courts. You've been around longer than I have, with all due respect, the most respect. With
all due respect, that was a very disrespectful thing to say.
So you have seen many Supreme Courts, and you have said there's no big mind on this current one. What does that mean?
Well, there's not. Other Supreme Courts, such as in the late 19th century that I argued before, they did have some leading brains. They had certain justices who set the tenor of the court because they had such overriding judicial philosophies that you were either with it or you came up with a counter philosophy. This court has no overriding philosophy, except if you actually think that originalism, the idea that you interpret the Constitution according to what the framers of the Constitution actually thought at the time in the 18th century, that's hardly a guide. And maybe the most pretentious intellectual on the court, the person who says basically to the world and to the other members of the court that he knows a lot, is Samuel Alito, who is a fraud. I mean, he is.
I know.
He is. That Dobbs decision has nothing in it. There is a very important doctrine called stare decisis, which means you follow the previous court's decisions unless you have a very good reason not to, and unless you have basically all of the court with you in changing your mind. Well, that Dobbs decision overruling, years, decades of a woman's right to have reproductive freedom, that decision by Alito was intellectually embarrassing.
Yeah.
There's nothing there.
And then the non-decision is a decision. It feels like they're eking out decisions in a way that's very interesting. And we're still waiting to hear a number of things. So emergency rooms, can they accept patients who need an emergency abortion coming from another state? That's coming up. Chevron deference, all these other things. Why is it the case that what's with the timing of it all?
Well, they're waiting. They're waiting. I think John Roberts, the Chief Justice, the only thing he has some control over is the timing of when these decisions actually are published. There is no court in the last 50 years that has waited this late to actually publish its opinions. And so there's some controversial ones. The public already dislikes the Supreme Court. I think we can expect that when the court's opinions come out, they are going to be counter to what the public believes and the public and public opinion.
And there will be no accountability for that?
No accountability. I think that's the key, Heather. There is no accountability. I mean, we've got to have, even in the code of ethics, that silly code of ethics they put out on conflicts of interest, which they've already thrown into the
ignored
wastebasket. There is no accountability. That's why I think if the Democrats take both houses of Congress and we get a Democratic president, please God, there has got to be an effort to both limit the number of years somebody can be on the court, on the Supreme Court, and then also maybe even expand the size of the court.
Mm-hmm. Yep, these reforms. One case that has been decided, remember the time when Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felonies?
I think I remember.
Right.
Yes, I do.
So that has been decided, and it was interesting because we were all saying, "What's going to happen? Is he going to be a hung jury? No. Will it be all 34? I'm sure it won't be all 34." And then it was. What has that made a splash in terms of polls? I'm not sure.
Well, it's a good question, and the jury, as it were, is still out on the effect on the election. The polls are pretty much where they were before that verdict against convicted felon Donald Trump. Now, one thing we did see is a huge bump in money to Trump. Small donations and a few big
and less
donations.
Small donations.
The day after the verdict, Timothy Mellon, the billionaire, gave Trump and the Trump campaign something in the order of $50 million. $50 million.
It's a huge donation.
The largest single disclosed public donation in history.
Right.
And remember something else. Timothy Mellon is the grandson of Andrew Mellon, who was Secretary of the Treasury for 12 years from Harding, Coolidge, Hoover days, presided over the administrations that gave us the Great Depression, the Great Crash, and also changed the tax code to allow money to move from generation to generation without much taxes. And guess what his legacy is? Trump.
Yeah.
Money to Trump.
And his grandson.
His grandson.
Trump.
His grandson, by the way, also gave a lot of money to Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Interesting.
So maybe
Maybe what?
maybe there's
he's making terrible choices?
well, he's not only making terrible choices, but I think it may be that there is some expectation that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is going to take more votes away from Biden than from Trump.
Right. I mean, of course, but we shall see, because his campaign isn't doing well besides his running mate and apparently Andrew Mellon.
Yeah, and if it weren't for
Timothy Mellon,
well, it's Andrew Mellon's money.
Right.
That's the point. It really does come from the 1920s.
Yep.
If it weren't for Timothy Mellon, yes, you're right. There would be very little money in Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign right now.
So next week is a debate, the debate, one of two, in Atlanta.
It's a big deal.
It's a huge deal.
And because it's nothing has happened really to change dramatically the tides in this election.
Right.
A lot of people are not concentrating. They're not focusing. That's not unusual. They don't focus usually until after Labor Day.
I wasn't listening.
But the stakes are so huge that you would expect and hope, particularly after the convicted felon becomes a convicted felon, Trump.
But Trump's been so interesting. So he was, kind of being his bombastic self for a while about the debate. And then he's kind of backtracked recently where he said, it's kind of rigged against me. And, Biden will probably do fine. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he'll do better than I do. I mean, what is happening?
Well, the debate rules. Now, this is not under the Presidential Debate Commission. This is just negotiated with CNN and the two campaigns.
Which is going to go great.
But there are two things to be mindful of. Number one, it's going to be in the studio without anybody else, without an audience.
Yes.
And Trump feeds off of an audience.
For sure.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Secondly, the microphones will be muted when the person asked a question, the candidate asked a question, is not there, is not responding, which is hard for Trump.
It'll be so interesting. You see all these people at his rallies, at these events, and it's almost like people are planted and they go from event to event. I mean, it's the same people.
I think it's
like a parade. It's like a pub crawl.
Well, and they're entertained.
Yep.
They love it.
And they're shouting and their T-shirts and it's,
But it's his fans, his groupies. Yeah. It is a cult. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of it is a cult.
Yep.
And the cult members go from place to place, but they won't be able to go to CNN headquarters in Atlanta. Now, is that going to help Trump? I mean, some people say it's going to help Trump because Trump really goes a little bit crazy when he has an audience and he can talk over a microphone.
Yeah, about sharks and all of it. Now, we're doing something fun.
We are?
Next week. We're going to try to do a live Coffee Klatch, everybody.
Okay, live. Put that on your calendars. Live Coffee Klatch next week, next Thursday night. And we're going to do it. So you're going to be seeing the debate. And then in a little corner of your television, Heather and I are going to be making faces and commentary and holding up signs and doing all kinds of things.
It'll be interesting. We'll see if people like it. That's all that matters. Is it helpful? Is it interesting?
Is it helpful?
Yeah. So we'll be seeking feedback. Right. So the debate.
If people want to see us.
It'll be on YouTube.
On YouTube.
Yeah. It'll be
and
on YouTube.
Substack.
And Substack. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. It'll be fun. Are we going to drink coffee that late at night? We'll have to see. Might have to switch to water. I don't know. We'll see. But so Trump and his economy. So you put in your Substack this week that you recommend to President Biden that he call out big business, he call out greedflation, these populist economic messages at the debate. Do you think he will?
Well, interestingly, in 1936, see, I'm that old. I really am. 1936, Franklin D. Roosevelt.
But you weren't alive in 36.
Franklin D. Well, no, I wasn't. I was circling.
You were thinking about.
I was thinking about. I was choosing my parents.
Right.
Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1936, going into his second election, made a speech. He actually gave two speeches. One speech at Madison Square Garden, and the second speech accepting the Democratic nomination for president. And those speeches, he basically called the Republicans and the big money behind the Republican Party economic royalists and said, I welcome their hatred. They hate me. I welcome their hatred. And I think that I would recommend, not that he's listening, President Biden, if you're listening, you might consider calling the big money that is behind Trump economic royalists, and you welcome their hatred, because this is the business community now. Big money, big corporations are
big CEOs.
now moving to Trump because they get a tax cut. He's promising them another tax cut, an extension of the 2017, 2018 tax cut that ends in 2025. And he says he's going to, if they get him elected, he's going to make that permanent.
Why did he pick that window, 2018 to 2025?
Because he didn't, at the time, the Congressional Budget Office does an estimate of the cost to the United States of a tax cut. And he didn't want the public to see that if it were permanent, that cost would be, it would just explode the budget deficit, as it did, actually, but it would explode it even more. The CBO has done an estimate. If those extensions, if it's extended, that Trump tax cut, if it's extended permanently, it's $4.4 trillion added to the national debt. Heather, that means that if Trump wants to do anything else, he obviously can't. He's probably going to have to take money away from Social Security and Medicare, which every one of his budgets that he submitted when he was president, he cut Social Security and Medicare.
But it's going to trickle down.
Yes.
It's really horrendous. Okay, so the election is coming up. I think we have 19 coffee clutches until the election. I did it back at the envelope.
Well,
that's soon.
That's
Or is that a lot? No, I think it's soon. And so economics is going to be a huge issue. Trumponomics this week, I really enjoyed you on The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell, by the way, on Wednesday, talking about Trump's latest crazy plan to get rid of income taxes and issue a whole bunch of inflated tariffs.
I mean, this is wild.
It's wild. I hope Biden calls him out on that.
I hope so. I hope so.
We'll see.
Because we learned in 1930 the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which raised not nearly as much tariffs as Trump is talking about, but did raise tariffs. Almost every economist understands that helped plunge us deeper into the Great Depression of the 1930s.
Right.
And
the Smoot-Hawley Act.
And
right.
Trump is talking about getting rid of the income tax, which a lot of people might say, woohoo, and substituting tariffs. Now, to do that, you would and actually make avoid an even larger federal deficit and debt, you would have to have tariffs that are in the range of 130 to 160%. 130, you would.
So that new car,
everything
that
coming from abroad would cost twice or three times as much, and it's absurd because people would buy much less of everything coming from abroad, and it means their tariffs would have to continue to go up in order to make up for the loss of the taxes.
And who's impacted the most by this kind of thing? Is it the people with the giant paychecks, or is it the working class and the poor?
Well, that's a very, very good question. Obviously, the income tax is slightly progressive in the sense that, to a slight degree, people who are wealthier pay a little bit more of their income. But no, this would be the equivalent of a gigantic sales tax, which would be very regressive. People who are middle class, lower middle class, working class, and poor would be paying through the nose, and the rich would be getting off much less.
Yeah. So the election's coming up. There was some new interesting data out of Sister District that was talking about the fact that people who roll off the ballot, so those that start filling things out and then they just put down the pen and get out of the booth, and they don't fill out the entire ballot, those people on average get their news more often from social media than traditional ballots.
From us.
I mean, traditional media. Yeah, God willing, from us. But it's kind of wild. This came at the same time as the Surgeon General has said we need warning labels across social media. It's not good for the mental health of young people and probably anyone. So it'll be interesting to see all that's
it's
happening.
Very interesting. I mean, do you think the implication of that study is that social media, people who get their news from social media, are not really thinking about or particularly sensitive to their local conditions or their state economy or their state politicians? They are only thinking about the big issues that affect the country as a whole, and even then they are having a highly distorted view of what those big issues are. To me, that's a troubling trend.
Well, also, I think if you look at the $50 million that's going from Timothy Mellon to Trump, I think it's maybe already has all been spent on ads online, probably some television as well. I think there's huge spending, and so that disproportionately gets into people's feeds, and then they're overly focused on it. And as a culture, I feel like we're obsessed with the presidency in a way that I don't remember having been obsessed. Now, there's reasons for it, but it's still, I think, showing up on social media, too, in the way people...
in the 1950s, when I was a boy...
Yes.
Dwight Eisenhower was president. Now, I don't know, how many... Do you remember Dwight Eisenhower? Anybody remember Dwight Eisenhower? Do you remember Dwight Eisenhower?
Very well.
He was so boring. He was the quintessence of boredom. And he, in 52 and in 56, Adlai Stevenson was opposed to him. He was boring.
I miss those boring
You
guys,
miss those
like
boring
you wouldn't
days.
believe.
I mean, it was nobody paid attention to the presidency, at least as much as we do, until John F. Kennedy.
That, yes. I'm sure many people have written about that, but that tracks, makes sense. Okay, what else? I don't know. The one other thing I think we should talk about is the fact that Biden is getting blamed for so much of this, and that's also a trend, right? So people kind of don't fill out the bottom of the ballot on average. People, I think, of course, blame who's in office right now. We're going to blame that person right in front of me
now, you're talking
for all
about
the economic woes.
Oh, for the economic problem.
Yeah.
Well, here's what we can conclude. Now, I'm not a big poll person. I am a poll skeptic. I think polls this early are worth very, very, very little.
I'd love to hear you say that.
But when you see poll after poll after poll after poll saying the same thing, it's worth your attention. And what they're showing is that the big issue for the public, not surprisingly, is the economy. And the big issue in the economy is the cost of living still.
Yeah.
And the big issue in the cost of living are rents and food.
Yep. Gas.
Maybe.
Yep.
And people are paying a lot of attention to those. And they are blaming Biden because those three categories, the prices have not come down.
Corporations might have an issue to do with that.
A lot of the studies show that it is really corporate power. It's pricing power. It's big corporations whose profits have never been as high.
Yeah.
Record levels. CEO pay has never been as high. Executive pay has never been as high. The stock market is going gangbusters.
Right. Biden doesn't get credit for that, by the way.
Not only does Biden not get credit, but you can look at all of these indicators and see, in a way, why consumers and regular people are being shafted.
I know. You had a powerful, we put out a video this week, but yesterday was the anniversary of the horrendous murders during Freedom Summer, right? And you've written about it, and we put a video together where you talked about the death of Michael Schwerner, and it was so powerful. So I wanted to thank you for sharing that horrendous story from your vantage point. Do you want to speak a little bit about it? I know it makes you
Heather,
feel funny.
it still is painful for me to talk about it. When I was a little boy, because I'm very, very short, I was always teased and it was worse than teasing. I was beat up.
I can't imagine.
And I looked to a few older boys as protectors. One of them was Mickey. I didn't really know his last name. It's a cute fellow. He was about 7 years older than I was, a little sailor cap, but very warm gracious, lovely, lovely young teenager. I was about 8 years old at the time. And it was not until I got to college that I heard that what had happened to Mickey. I didn't need that kind of protection when I was 9 and 10. By the time I was a teenager, Mickey had gone to Mississippi in Freedom Summer of 1964. And he, along with 2 other civil rights workers trying to register black voters in the state of Mississippi, Cheney and Goodman, the 3 of them were brutally murdered. And this is just about the time, by the way, that Barry Goldwater accepted the Republican convention at the Cow Palace in Daly City. And, he said, extremism in pursuit of liberty is no vice. Well, the fact is that the Klan, who murdered Mickey Schwerner, the Klan was extremism in pursuit of their vision of liberty, which was a country that would not have black voters, certainly a state. And the state of Mississippi didn't want to press charges. There was, ultimately not one of the Klansmen who had killed Mickey and the 2 other civil rights workers were in jail for more than 6 years. But when I heard about this as a college freshman, it really did change my life. It changed because up until then I had thought about bullying only in terms of, being teased and occasionally roughed up by second graders. I hadn't thought about bullying on the large scale of, the Klan, and black people being bullied by white people, and women being bullied by men, and people with disabilities being bullied by and made fun of by politicians, and like Donald Trump.
Right. And workers, right, by their employers.
And workers being bullied by employers. In other words, we have a society, and it's worldwide, in which people with power very often abuse their power, and they bully people without power. And I think it was like a veil was lifted from my eyes. So it was 60 years ago yesterday.
That must be wild to think about, too.
Well, it is wild to think about.
I mean, personally, but also just that we thought the country was so far from that.
Well, the Civil Rights Act,
for democracy.
Lyndon Johnson did pass. Even Goldwater voted against it. But the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act, I think, of 64, I think many of us thought we are finally on the road to a more equitable and just society. And I think in many ways we were. But that momentum has been lost. And going back to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court that has opened the floodgates to big money in politics for all the corporations, talk about bullying. It's the same Supreme Court that said in Shelby County versus Holder, no. If you are relying on the Voting Rights Act, no. We're getting rid of, we're gutting Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, the most important section, which was the pre-clearance.
Right.
States like Mississippi, if they were going to change voting laws, they had to get pre-clearance from the Justice Department. No, said the Supreme Court, we don't need that anymore.
It's horrible.
Well, this Supreme Court has been, to go back to our initial discussion, has been on the side of the bullies.
Oh, it's ugly. Well, so thank you for sharing that story with us all.
Well, I'm sorry it has to be.
I mean, of course, but it's so important. I mean, we can't just ignore the past. I mean, we have to look at it, and I think look at it with through different prisms. So hearing your story, I think, adds a new angle to it all that is important for everyone to hear, whether we like it or not. It's horrible.
Well, we are all in the same society, in the same world, and what happens to one of us happens to all of us. A society to me is defined by the duties we owe one another as members of the same society. I mean, look at the heat wave. For example, a lot of people in America are suffering, particularly poor people who don't have air conditioning, but a lot of people are suffering. Why are they suffering? It's not just the heat wave. It's also because the oil and gas industry refuses to support green technologies. Donald Trump is right now promising them a rollback in all of the environmental protections of the Biden administration if they will give him $1 billion. Talk about bullying.
Yep.
I mean, this is all related. Just connect the dots.
Yep. And also, heat-related deaths are the highest they've ever been. I mean, this is really important.
And it's all around the world. And a lot of people say, oh, we can't do anything about it. Well, of course we can do something about it. We here in the United States are the richest country in the history of the world. Don't get me going.
I think we did. It's been great.
All right.
Okay,
Heather,
live Klatch. We're doing a live Coffee Klatch for the debate. We'll see everyone there.
We'll see you there. And we'll see you there. Everybody, you have a great weekend, and don't let the heat get you down. Hope you're safe. Hope you're well. And we'll catch you Thursday.